Check 1 2.
Is it on now?
Yes, on. Alright, let me just connect the interpreter.
Yeah, sure. Is that yeah. Yeah, you mean so yeah. So the minister is gonna sit there. Okay. And then so I'm gonna move it very fast. Just because time.
Because the program is too long.
Yeah, no, no.
It's too long, and if we can push quick.
Yeah. But I start first by welcoming the minister, then national anthem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's put this one.
I'm trying to take out my watch. DJ. Usolani must be here. Go to. You need somebody to sanitize here. Yeah, just so after every speaker.
Okay, let me check.
Colleagues, let's get started and seated. We'll be starting in less than 30 seconds. Let me take this opportunity to welcome the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Natim Tetra, to this important engagement. Time is not on our side. Ladies and gentlemen, may we all rise and sing the national anthem so that we can get started. My name is Sipo Siepe. I'll be your program director this morning, and my role will be shared also by Dr. Mohapi, who will be taking over from me during the second session. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this National Language Stakeholder Engagement Forum. The objectives of the forum and this event have been circulated to you, so I will not waste time in going through what is expected. But to indicate to the minister that this department is the heartbeat of and the conscience of any government. Without culture, we do not exist. And without language, we cannot begin to say we are registered in the history of mankind. We are what we speak. So the importance of language is something that has been recognized the world over. Language is about respect. Language is about development. And language is about progress. Without much ado, may I take this opportunity to invite the director, Dr. Noel Solani, to welcome us to this space that we occupy. Dr. Solani.
Good morning. To the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Nkosinathi Mthethwa, to the Director General of the same department, Mr. Usumuzi Mkhize, the MC, Professor Sipho Siepe, our National Poet Laureate, which I haven't seen yet, Professor Mohane Wali Serote, executives and CEOs of different institutions, leadership of higher education institutions, and their representatives, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ditsong Museums of South Africa, capably led by Ms. Annabelle Libet, it is my singular honor to welcome you to the Ditsong Cultural History Museum. I hope you would find time to move around and view our exhibitions. Speaking in Portuguese at the funeral of Eduardo Mondlane, who was brutally murdered in 1969, Amilcar Cabral stated the following: "The value of culture as an element of resistance to foreign domination lies in the fact that culture is the vigorous manifestation on the ideological or idealistic plane of the physical and historical reality of the society that is dominated or to be dominated. Culture is simultaneously the fruits of a people's history and a determinant of history by the positive or negative influence which exerts on the resolution of relationships between man and his environment, among men or group of men within a society, as well as among different societies," close quote. Language is one of the significant aspects of any culture. Most cultural practices are expressed through language. Idioms and proverbs in any language tend to express a people's desire as well as their own experience. It could be something practical or an aspiration. Once you take that away from any group of people and impose yours, a generation is deprived of knowing themselves and their own connection to the past. As we all know, and as the sociocultural theorist Lev Semyonovich-Vygotsky informs us, language itself is a very powerful tool of intellectual adaptation. We think, we do, we dream, we translate, and we interact better with our environment through our own languages. While we have a long way to go as museums in South Africa, and in particular the Ditsong Museum of South Africa, delegates gathered here would be glad to know that In terms of language policy, the Ditsong Museum of South Africa adopted 4 languages as official languages of the institution, alphabetically written. One of them is Afrikaans, English, Sepedi, and isiZulu. In our internal meetings, we allow translation to take place from whatever language that one is speaking to one of these languages. This allows us to better express ourselves and our desires. It allows for clear communication. It eliminates many ambiguities. There is no greater freedom than to be allowed to be you, for your physical and your intellectual being to be reconciled in your first language. However, in our exhibition, this has not yet reflected because of financial resources, a subject that I think will dominate the stakeholders gathered here. How do we make all these noble ideas that speak to the core of who we are without significant financial investments in a country with competing needs, all equally important for our survival? Now, we wish the deliberation by this forum success, since we believe that they seek to address the flaws of our society that were deliberately created by colonialist and apartheid ideologues to suppress the culture and languages of the majority of the citizens of the country. By gathering here, you continue to show commitment to do away with the culture that is against humanity, to borrow from Klaas Maphepha or Vusi Mavi's sayings. For suppression of any of the units of our cultures is an act of inhumanity. I thank you and wish you well in your deliberations. Thank you.
There is no greater freedom than the right to be you. Very profound. And it is in language that you find yourselves. Let me indicate that while we've invited every sector, every department, there have been some that had indicated that they may not be able to be here. Fortunately, it is the only one that has sent an apology. That's eThekwini municipality. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to invite the Director General of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Vusimusi Mkize, to give us the thinking around why we are here. And having said so, I know that he's a person who's in charge of the purse, but I would like to insist on him by reminding him what he told me this morning, that I must ensure that people stick to time. So I'm going to start with him. Mr. Mkize.
No, Prof, it doesn't apply to me. Honorable Minister, Minister Natim Tetwa, the Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture in the Republic of South Africa, the Program Director, Professor Siepe, the CEO of Child Mannya Maxeke Institute, Mr. Makanya, and the representatives, Drs. Mohapi, the co-program director, heads of languages from the various provinces of our country, but also would like to greet the academics from the various universities and institutions who are able to make it to this forum of engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, today the theme of this forum is the year of Mannya Charlotte Maxeke, advancing South Africa's official languages and strengthening the language practice. In other words, the intention to move beyond policy to practice. The theme is both a recognition of the legacy of our past and the contribution of Mama Mannya Charlotte Maxeke. In fact, I should be saying Mama Charlotte Mannya Maxeke. To our freedom, and it is a quest for us in the present a call to take forward our languages through strengthening our language practice. So the purpose of this engagement forum is, if I may just preface, by the very same lady of the firsts in this country, Maxeke, where she says, "This work is not for yourselves. Kill that spirit of self and do not live above your people, but live with them. And if you can rise, bring someone with you." Close quote. Can you imagine this is over 150 years ago when she had this visionary thinking about taking someone along with you. So her observation is a demonstration of selflessness, that those who know more should not be content with their knowledge and should not talk to themselves, but speak to others in a common conversation, a shared action, a movement together towards a better future. Her words are still relevant today to encourage us in whatever we do to think of other people first in order to advance the spirit of Batupili through our own Batupili principles. So it is simple, it is a simple recognition of human equality, but it is also profound as it instills a sense of duty, a higher pride, not in the self, but in the solidarity with others. It is this profound humanism that defined the struggle for freedom. It was not for one, but for all of us. And it was nothing about us without us. The languages we speak and the South African nation we build are important in as far as they enable us to communicate with others around us. After all, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. We have been created to believe that on tribalism, ethnicity, and racialism, some languages are more important than others. This is a myth that must be debunked. So the purpose of this National Language Stakeholder Engagement Forum responds to a call to action, but also seeks to revitalize engagements amongst the three spheres of government: the linguistics, academics, speakers, and all people who have an interest in our languages. So allow me to acknowledge all those present here to make sure that this forum is a success. It is long overdue that we meet to discuss issues pertaining to the development and promotion of languages. We congratulate the Titsong Museum for having adopted the 4 languages. It is a first step in the right direction to implement the Official Languages Act of 2012. So in our democracy, there are many opinions expressed in many tongues, but only when we come together can we begin to speak in one voice. So this sector has to work hard to make sure that our citizens realize the joy of having the 11 official languages, which are soon to be 12, with the inclusion of the South African Sign Language as one of them. Collectively, the sector has to move with speed in standardizing, developing, and promoting these languages across the board, working closely with the Pan South African Language Board, who has been working tirelessly all these years to make sure that the deaf community is not excluded in any form of engagement as citizens of this country. And I'm happy that we've got a minister who has taken this to heart. In fact, he has instructed, Mr. Mteto has instructed all of us to make sure that at every event of government or by anyone who is part of this department's portfolio, entities, or department itself, we ensure that we have the sign language interpreter being available. So very often we tend to work in silos. This engagement is meant to shift this mindset in order to see multilingualism blossoming fully in our country. The challenges faced by the speakers of different languages in the country are still serious, as all of us are still not able to access information readily in the language of our choice. We are still not able to walk into government institutions and be serviced in our own languages. If we begin to work together in the same direction, we will realize that our destination is attainable in support of a multilingual state as enshrined in our Constitution, and go beyond to ensure that we strengthen our democracy. So let us commit ourselves in the promotion of multilingualism. With these few words, we hope to engage fruitfully with all language stakeholders and practitioners in fast-tracking the development of our languages and to come up with tangible programs that will see these languages on par with each other. No language is devoid of science, devoid of any form of technology. There is no language that is incapable of being a growth language. Therefore, we need to ensure that all languages have opportunity to thrive, and therefore those who speak that language to also feel and find their rightful place in society. So languages are not to be judged by the number of speakers, but by the multiplicity of stories told in them and the pathways they travel, the ideas shared in them, and the programs that we develop as a nation through them. It is our mandate to work as hard as we can to safeguard language development and to recognize that the more ways in which we can understand the world through many languages, the richer we will be in cultural wealth and ways of thinking and leading humanity. So through this partnership and this engagement forum, we can all go so much further. Together with the different institutions of higher learning, we are offering bursaries in different language fields, and as we are also in partnership with others in developing human language technology tools in previously disadvantaged languages, I believe we are making strides in ensuring that we advance all our official languages. However, again, only together we shall see that our languages will advance and take the country forward to realize the dream of unity in diversity, whether in language or in culture. I wish you well in your deliberations. I hope this clarifies why you are here, and I'm sure I was able to beat your time. Thank you very much, Prof.
DJ, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, consider that to be a line of march from the minister's office through the DG. And the direction is very simple. It's about moving beyond policy to practice. It is about taking our languages forward. Most importantly, as the DG indicated, this is not about us. And as he quoted Charlotte Maxeke, he reminded us that we have a responsibility as leaders to ensure that we don't live above our people. With that, I would like to invite the group executive of SABC. And as I invite her, I also want to remind her about the housekeeping in terms of time.
Honorable Minister, and all present today, all protocol observed. Please excuse me, it's not my area. I have a very short presentation, and I think that the focus really here is to highlight the progress that the SABC has made in really ensuring that we broadcast in all languages of South Africa, but very importantly, promoting languages in South Africa, particularly the marginalized languages of South Africa. Next slide, please. The SABC has a duty to treat all languages equally in the country. And furthermore, as the public broadcaster, the SABC needs to promote all languages, including our South African Sign Language, languages from the Khoi, Nam, as well as the San languages. In fulfilling the SABC's language mandate, we ensure that the rights of individuals and communities are preserved. We do this by providing quality, compelling content across TV, radio, as well as our digital platforms. We reflect the needs of each of the language communities that we serve in South Africa. We maintain separate radio services in each language, and we ensure that we integrate sign language in much of our content. And you will have seen that news in particular ensures that there's always sign language available. And we ensure that all the non-official languages that are spoken in South Africa are also promoted. Next slide, please. This is just a very brief slide to highlight, in terms of our television platforms, what we've been able to achieve. You will see that television perspective, we have a reach of almost 26 million per week across SABC 1, 2, and 3, and some of our other television platforms. And from these, we have various targets by ICASA. And to a large extent, we have exceeded these targets. And these figures, by the way, reflect the month that we've just passed. But you'll see from the language perspective, we have also significantly increased our non-English content. And although some of it has not reached targets because of various other matters, such as, for example, having to cater for speeches and the like, we have been very aggressive in making sure that more content is available in non-English speaking languages. The same applies to SABC 2 and SABC 3. Next slide, please. Our children's programs, as well as our educational programs, are also famed for being multilingual in nature. And the tables that I've presented here today demonstrate that, you know, with the exception of a few programs like Jabu's Jungle and Mam Sakile, all of our children's programs are multilingual. This is really important because children grow up understanding the importance of the various languages in the country and encourages them to respect those languages. The same applies to our educational program. We've seen that, you know, through drama and talk shows, as well as other magazine programs, we've been able to really cater a multilingual offering to our viewers and our listeners across the country. Most South Africans will find programming in their respective language on SABC. Next slide, please. This is an important slide, colleagues. The SABC obviously has the largest portfolio in terms of radio. We are currently sitting about 46% of the radio platforms in the country, and this is through our 19 radio stations. Very recently, in fact, 2 weeks ago, BRC announced their latest figures, and our radio stations came out on top. And what is interesting here, of course, Ukozi FM has always led. It is now obviously one of the biggest radio stations in the world, but certainly one of the largest on the continent. What's really important for us is that even radio stations as big as that are actually growing substantially, which means the public are responding to the content that we're offering in their indigenous languages. And very important, again, for some of the smaller language groups, we've also seen quite a bit of growth, and it's very exciting to see that. Next slide. I'm going to focus specifically on XKFM. You'll be aware that we have a radio station that was launched now 25 years ago, XKFM, that is based in Bloemfontein and caters specifically to the Kwe and the Klu language communities in that area. I don't know whether you can click on the sound there just for the audience to hear the actual language. I don't know if you can do that. There's a sound button there. No, doesn't seem like we're getting much joy. It would have been really nice to actually listen to the language. But we've been really focusing on growing and also, through promoting really diverse programming on XKFM, have been really promoting the language. But what we've actually realized is that we cannot confine XKFM just to that community. So what we've started to do at the SABC during Heritage Month, we specifically had all of our African language stations promoting XKFM on their platform. So Zulu speaking listeners on Ukozi FM were learning basic words on learning basic words about the Klu and the Kwe languages on Ukozi FM, and the same applied across Ikwekwezi, Tobela FM, Mungana Lonene, etc. This, we believe, is an important gesture, colleagues, because if you don't get exposed to a language, you don't have much appreciation for the culture that that language represents. So South Africans need to hear the language of the Klu and the Kwe communities more in order to take an interest, in order to learn the languages, in order to grow the language. It's a pity we couldn't hear the sound, but we continue. Next slide, please. I think this is a very exciting slide, colleagues. You are all aware of the reach of our SABC News platform, which is by far one of the most respected platforms in the country and on the continent, and is actually, in terms of reach, the largest in the country. We launched in 2019 the first African language digital news platform, which was obviously in isiZulu and followed by isiXhosa. And we saw the traction that this actually gained from the public. So the public were really interested in following news in their respective languages online. And we grew from that and decided, no, in 2020, we're going to introduce Afrikaans and the other Sotho, Pedi languages. And then this year, we really took another leap by expanding that even more and introducing languages such as Chivenda, etc. This is critical, colleagues, because if you are going to preserve a language, you've also got to be appealing to a younger generation who are consuming content online. And so this needs to be available to them to be actually embracing and consuming their language on digital platforms. Next slide, please. And I think finally, what was really important for us to emphasize, and I know that we've got a speaker from Deaf SA present here today, I think it's the president. It's really critical for us to ensure that our programming is catered for our communities that are hard of hearing and deaf. And so the SABC has done quite a lot in this area. We are obviously aware of our news bulletins that are always accompanied by a sign language interpreter. our programs, particularly our educational programs that have sign language interpretation. But I think very important for the SABC is that this year we brought about a new innovation where we actually introduced hearing content for the deaf for radio. So Ukhozi FM launched a program where a radio program was actually filmed at the same time and had an interpreter. So for the first time, deaf people could actually follow what was being said on radio. And this we are really proud of. We believe that this is definitely the future. And we've had lots of deaf people from all over the world contacting us, congratulating us on the fact that they are able to follow programming on Ukhozi FM because of a sign language interpreter. So this, I think, is the future, and certainly something that we want to extend beyond Ukhozi FM to the other platforms. Colleagues, I think in closing, to really emphasize that the SABC really values language, not just because it's a part of our mandate, but as a previous speakers have highlighted, for preserving culture, preserving our history. And we will continue to invest extensively to not only grow, but preserve languages, particularly the marginalized. Thank you.
I would like to thank Ms. Gugu Ntuli, the Group Executive of SABC, for building on what the DG had said, that it is in language that we restore, reclaim the right to dream. It is in language that we find multiplicity of stories. And I want to thank Ms. Gugu Ntuli for ensuring and exposing us to those stories and for safeguarding language development in this country. And as the DG says, we are much richer in the cultural world because of that. May I take this opportunity to invite Mr. Edward Mafatsa, the CEO of the Culture, Religious and Linguistic Rights Commission, to present to us how the Commission continues to advance linguistic rights of our people. Mr. Mafatsa.
Thank you so much, Program Director, the Honorable Minister, and the Honorable guests, and the DG and other colleagues. I must take this opportunity within the time frame that I am given to quickly run through the highlights of what the Commission is doing about the language question. It is our tradition as a Commission that we do not speak without touching a bit of our mandate when it comes to the concept that we are addressing. So I will start by talking to the Bill of Rights just in 1 second, that it actually articulates that everyone has the right to use the language and to participate in the cultural life of their choice, but no one exercising these rights may do so in a manner inconsistent with any provision of the Bill of Rights. The point is made that persons belonging to a cultural, religious, or linguistic community may not be denied the right with other members of that community to enjoy their culture, practice their religion, and use their language. If you look at Section 6 of the founding provisions, it articulates all the official languages that we have in the country. As we know them, I will not mention them. But it goes further to recognize the historically diminished languages that are not used, and to elevate the status of the indigenous languages of our people. So it gives the mandate to the state that we must take practical and positive measures to elevate the status and advance the use of these languages. The letter and spirit of the words is that all languages are equal. The state is enjoined to correctively take the necessary steps to elevate to equality the formerly depressed languages. The 11 language policy was an attempt to satisfy this wide range of contending interests and to avoid possible future conflicts around this potential explosive and divisive issue. African languages, now that is when you compare English and Afrikaans with others. African languages were officially promoted to the status of national languages, but decades after the end of the apartheid regime, the equality of the 9 African languages with English and Afrikaans remains more on paper than in reality. As Professor Sizwe Sacho of the University of Cape Town made the point, 1 + 1 = 11. The point is made that Afrikaans took not more than 35 years for its development and implementation. It did not become a commercial language by luck. It was instead developed through a conscious and determined plan, which was pursued by the African-speaking people. The most fundamental principle is that language cannot be developed unless it is used. Hence, indigenous languages will not develop unless they are used by their own speakers. In the context, the Civil Rights Commission intervened using different approaches in the language question. We conducted a research on language issues, public hearings, and dealt with complaints related to linguistic rights of communities. We made recommendations to different organs of state, including Parliament, in our efforts to advance linguistic rights of communities. Some policy recommendations that we have made, for instance, in the project of language in education policy, we had actually said that language being core to a community's sense of identity and its culture. This was the conclusion, that the language is core to a community's sense of identity and its culture. All language policy formulation should involve local actors because it is their social lives that will be directly affected by language policy. Within educational institutions, language should be understood as having some bearing on school performance. However, it cannot be regarded as a panacea for all educational problems, and I'll talk to this point towards my conclusion. When we again look at the language in education policy as a commission, given that school governing bodies have the power to decide on the language policy of a school and to seek the necessary funding from the Department of Education to implement such policy, the CRRS Commission should engage, and this is a continuous engagement we are doing, with school governing bodies to promote greater understanding of and respect for the language rights of learners. That is very critical. This is a continuous engagement with school governing bodies that we are making. The principle of protecting the rights to and of language should be actively pursued to prevent the loss of any language, irrespective of the number of speakers of the language. I think the DG touched on that point as well. The usage of African languages in commerce and trade. It was a national project that we worked on, and we reflected on some recommendations. I'm just giving highlights, 1 or 2. In order to promote the use of African languages in commerce and trade, non-African communities should start learning African languages. African language speakers should help their children in order to use their languages with pride, because if we are not proud of our own languages, we will not be able to promote them. Now, there are many, many languages other than the official languages that the Commission is dealing with, which I'll just touch. In other words, you will find that instead of where we are now as a country, we may have to increase the pace to include other languages that are marginalized as we speak. I'll give you an example of isiHlubi, which is a language on its own, which is spoken in KZN and other areas. Now, when we dealt with this project, and it was even a complaint to us, we said isiHlubi or amaHlubi should use performing arts such as music, drama, and soapies to educate the broader community about their language, because it's a language that is spoken in one area. And the same will apply to Kilovedu, Isibaca, Isipondo, Sipulana, Northern Ndebele, and others that we are dealing with as a commission as part of the complaints that they brought to the commission. Department of Education should help establish schools where these languages, or isiHlubi, will be a language of teaching and learning, because it is a challenge when these children who speak this language, they are to go to school and write the exams in another language, while at home they speak other languages. I will, again, this is the second point I will emphasize towards my conclusion. I gave an example of Kilovedu, Spulana, and others as some of the languages, and Ndebele, Isibaca, and Spond, as some of the languages that are fighting for their survival, and they are on our table as we speak. On some of them, such as Kilovedu and Northern Ndebele, the Commission had already made submissions to the portfolio committees to begin to engage in some of the recommendations we have made on our interventions, on how we think they can deal with the complaints that people are raising. We are happy that when it comes to Nama and sign language, we jointly made submissions and presentations with PENSAP to the Constitutional Review Committee, and we are glad that at least there is progress when it comes to sign languages as we speak. A number of complaints related to language rights comes to the Commission, and it is critical that there is a willingness to improve the language policy where there are gaps, to purposely treat the other languages equal to Afrikaans and English. As a result, the Commission is currently working on concluding the public hearings on language rights, and I think out of this, we are likely to recommend that there should be what is called provincial official languages in order to accommodate those that are only spoken in specific provinces, while we still maintain the national ones as per the status quo. Multilingualism is the way to go, DG. The outcome of the multilingualism conference organized by the Commission indicates that the high failure rate of learners in high school is also articulated to language barriers. A child who speaks Xitsonga is competing equally with a child who was taught maths in Afrikaans or English, which the two are a mother tongue to the other child. How do you justify the one-sided achievement as the Xitsonga child is firstly battling with understanding the second language? But the question paper that they are writing now is the same. Don't we think that our children can perform better if they had a choice to answer questions in their own languages? Perhaps the training of our teachers should also change to purposely direct them to skills that empowers them to be able to assist learners who answer a question in any language spoken in a particular province to mark their answers with ease. And this was a very strong contribution that came from COSAS in this conference, where they are saying that if you give me a biology question paper and I come to a question where I feel I am running short of vocabulary to explain what the process is, and I understand it in Setswana, allow me to write it, but the teacher must be empowered to be able to mark it in English and Setswana. So that training is what we are trying to talk to. We can learn from other countries like Japan, Korea, China, and perhaps those could be a good model for our educational system to address the language question. Chair, Program Director, I do have a lot of information, but with 10 minutes, I think I must stop here. Thank you so much.
Mr. Mafatsa, thank you very much for reminding us that language development is a constitutional injunction. Not long ago, the University of South Africa lost a case in court. The Constitutional Court ruled that it cannot suppress the use or undermine the rights of African-speaking students when it decided to try to move to English-only instruction. You also reminded us about the importance of language in education. And if people read you carefully, you were almost suggesting, not suggesting, but stating it that in not paying attention to language in education, we are actually violating the rights of young people. Minister, language is about power, and language develops faster when it is spoken by people in power. And it's not difficult to understand. It is because people want to access the language of power. If you look at countries where a president, a minister starts speaking in a particular language, people try to understand what the minister says or the president says, because in the minister, there lies authority. In the president, there lies authority. So effectively, what the CEO of the CRL Rights Commission is saying is that we have a duty to ensure that language development is not something that will happen magically. And we have an example of Afrikaans, that it rose from being the youngest language to becoming a language of science, technology, and science. And African languages deserve no better. There should be investment in terms of effort. There should be investment in terms of time. There should be investment in terms of resources. With that, I would like to invite the CEO of National Heritage Council, Dr. Lukwareni, to take us forward on how the heritage sector is approaching the issue of language development.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I was waiting to hear how you pronounce my first name. Allow me to start by acknowledging the presence of the Honorable Minister, Minister Mtetwa, the DG of the department, members from the academic institutions, as well as my colleagues from the public sector. Let me start by paraphrasing what Tata Mandela said. He said, if you talk to a man in a language that he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his language, that goes straight to his heart. This summary is very profound, especially bearing in mind how we as Africans live. I stand here representing the National Heritage Council, an entity of DSEC, charged with the issue of preserving, protecting, promoting sports, arts, culture, and heritage of South Africa. Language, therefore, being part of inherited culture, is the primary responsibility of what we do. NHC plays part in programs and projects that are aimed at redressing the past imbalance when it comes to cultural heritage management. The bias towards intangible heritage culture was prompted by the situation prior to 1994, in which the administration of the day focused more on the built environment and physical heritage at the expense of heritage that resides in Orecha. And needless to say, the administration of then purposefully used this intangible heritage to perpetuate their divide and rule and the inferiority complex amongst those that they suppressed. It stands as no surprise that if you were to walk into the population register office of then and said, I'm Sithole from Mozambique, they will spell your name differently. If you got there and said, I'm Sithole, I'm from Guyana, they'll spell it differently. If you got there and say you are Sithole from Natal, they will spell it differently. And this type of language innuendos perpetuate the divide and rule and what they stood for then. And these are the issues that we have to purposefully, intentionally, and aggressively redress. So the Constitution highlights the importance of preserving and protecting languages. And on Chapter 2, it also states that the state must take practical and positive measures to elevate the status and advance the use of these languages. Some few years ago, I visited Slovenia on a work purpose with an Afrikaans-speaking friend for 2 weeks. And for 2 weeks, we were speaking Afrikaans. And there was nothing so fulfilling to say, Kyk, hoe sterk die man is in Afrikaans, knowing that they will not understand us. And that beauty and ukunambitheka language, regardless of what it was in the past, was basically coming out in those 2 weeks. And on the said note, you will recall that in 1976 uprising, language was at the core of what happened there. And it continues to be a challenge, as alluded to by you, the program director in institutions of higher learning. Multilingualism was supposed to be the catalyst for a better democratic change, and that should serve as a valuable resource for social cohesion and economic success of the Rainbow Nation. I think the CEO of the CRL expanded on that to greater length. As the entity that strives to build a nation proud of its African heritage, ours is to ensure and intensify the ability of every South African to be fully conversant with the identity and sense of belonging in whichever way they may choose to express it through their language, song, dance, attire, or poetry. And nothing is more fulfilling than knowing others' language, dance, song, and poetry. Allow me to share with you in just 3 seconds. I learned from Mr. Mafadza that to beat your time, you must always say in conclusion. So in conclusion, we have an annual Heritage Education Schools Outreach Camp in partnership with the Department of Basic Education and other entities, in which learners are given research tasks about their cultural heritage, where there's an opportunity to express themselves in the language of their choice. The aim is to foreground cultural heritage in the school curriculum, and that includes African languages. Language practitioners are also invited to come to the camp and present on the importance of languages, especially as vehicles to transmit cultural practices, norms, and values. And in conclusion, we have recently embarked in the process of establishing an intangible cultural heritage inventory with the aim of depositing audiovisual information as recorded from our living legends. This recording will be mostly in African languages because most of the intangible heritage is better understood when explained in the language of its origin. Lastly, but not last, we partner with community organizations which have projects aimed at the promotion of indigenous knowledge, systems, and languages. We also fund projects that have the same objectives through our funding program. And in conclusion, through our research wing and the panel of experts, the NHC annually develops policy position papers which are aimed at bridging the gap between the preservation and promotion of these languages. We need to take cognizance of other subtle issues when we, in our quest to digitize and preserve the language knowledge. The dialect, obviously, it's something that we cannot ignore. The language in the past has some poetic connotation and something that for now I can almost call parental control, where your parents will discuss issues purposefully excluding you because they will be using the language that they know it's above you, but it's the same language. Some of the language, when they talk of it, even if you don't know who they're talking to, you can tell that they're talking to someone senior. Like when you're talking to a king or a traditional leader, it will be a certain language, and you will be able to deduce the social standing of that person. We still do it today, if you look at the headings when the late Joe Rodriguez passed away, I think one newspaper put it boldly to say, Timor's murderer kicked the bucket. So the language can be used to expressly express how people feel about situations. And then I have spoken about the royalty issues, and there will be language specifically reserved for entertainment, praise singing, and recognition. Prof, in the past, you will be called and Prof, he has killed 2 lions. He is the bravest man in this village, without giving you any piece of gold, and you will be walking very proud. And it will be the language that makes it so. Thank you very much.
The CEO of National Heritage Council, thank you very much. Let me assure you that your concern about time was raised by the minister this morning. He felt, correctly so, that there's so much wisdom, there's so much work that is being done, that we need to find more time to have this type of discussion. But most importantly, given the expertise, we need to get to a stage where the minister gives a directive to say, after 5 years, I want to make sure that all these entities that report to me would have developed particular language to become language of science, commerce, and technology. That way, once there is a directive and there's a timeline, there'll be nothing that focuses the mind on the deadline. I would like to now move to Mr. Druchen, who I'm told will be presenting this via our technology. And if the guys who are dealing with this are there, could they actually press so that we can move to the next session?
Good day, everyone. I am Druchen, the National Director of the Deaf Federation of South Africa. I just want to make a few statements regarding South African Sign Language that is owned by the deaf community in South Africa. South African Sign Language is a language that we use every day, and it's a language that is part of deaf culture and that is used by the community every day. It's a visual language, a language with its own grammatical structure, and where we use different features in the language. You cannot separate deaf culture from South African Sign Language. So we know South African Sign Language and how then also deaf culture as well. So approximately 500,000 deaf people in South Africa are South African Sign Language users. And the deaf community is proud users of South African Sign Language, just like me. And there are perspectives that there are dialects in South African Sign Language, but we as the deaf community have accepted it in the past and also in the present. We accept it, and like, for instance, a dialect that there's mother and mother. But there are different dialects that we are using, and it's accepted by the deaf community, and we do not want that to be taken away from us. We value it. We value the history of South African Sign Language, and when we meet as different communities right across South Africa, we understand each other. So if you want to change our language, let us have a discourse amongst leaders themselves. We have 42 schools of the deaf in South Africa. And our deaf schools, yes, there are definitely dialects, that is accepted by the deaf community. And we want to encourage you all to respect that and to accept the dialects that are in South African Sign Language. Hearing people want to standardize it, and that's only hearing people that wants to standardize it. The UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities said that the language need to be respected, or a language that are used by the deaf community, and it's recognized by the UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. So we had in the past so many interpreters that interpret for the various deaf communities, but now we only have one interpreter on television that interprets for all the communities in South Africa. So I will also share the WFD statement, the World Federation of the Deaf. The standardization of South African Sign Language or any other sign languages are not accepted. The variations in sign language are respected, and we do not want to abandon the English word, like, for example, truck or lorry. Do you want to abandon it? Do you want to choose which one you want to use? No, it's the same applies to South African Sign Language. When we use the sign for elevator or lift, is it exact? Do you want to take those words away? It's exactly the same meaning. So why do you want to change our language, but you find those variations in the English spoken languages as well? So my pleas today, please do not try to standardize South African Sign Language. If you want to try this, you're going to take away the rights of the deaf community and you're going to destroy our history. Please accept our variations in South African Sign Language and accept South African Sign Language. We are using a language, and I'm sure everyone can understand me that are deaf, because I'm using South African Sign Language. Thank you for this opportunity. Love you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think the plea is loud and clear. And there's a convergence from what was said earlier about speak to a man in his language, then you touch his heart. But what we also heard just now is that nothing about us without us. And most importantly, DG, and also for the Ms. Gugu Ntuli, is the request around the respecting the various dialects in sign language. Without much ado, may I call Mr. Edward Mdau, the chairperson of PENSALP, and he and I had already spoken about the time issue, and I would not want to remind him.
Program Director, thank you so much. While we were speaking about the time issue, I also reminded you that I was told that I have 10 minutes, and that's what I've recorded in myself. Before I go to what I'm supposed to go through here, let me say to the Minister, very soon, if the strategy which we are using in this financial year doesn't work as much as we aspire it to, we will come and knock on your door so that you assist us by speaking to your colleagues at Cabinet that they enforce the policy, the language, and the establishment of the units within their departments. Honorable Minister, DG Program Director, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends in the language fraternity, good morning and welcome. As the Pan South African language, we are deeply heartened by what is happening here today. This is an important and critical platform which will contribute tremendously towards the furtherance of multilingualism and language development in the country. It is said that there is always political context to language usage, and ours is one fraught with linguistic injustice and subjugation of African indigenous languages. Therefore, it is our collective responsibility as a democratic government to ensure that we redress and set course for the transformation agenda set out in the Constitution to ensure that our people feel a sense of belonging when engaging with government in as far as the language aspect is concerned. Our citizens must feel a sense of belonging when they must feel present and represented in public, civic, and political life of this country. If we truly are a government that is by the people, for the people, we must then be one that also speaks the languages of the people that we are representing. That is why we are pleased that the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture has revived this National Language Stakeholder Forum, as it will provide an opportunity for us to hold each other accountable in order to achieve the founding provisions of our Constitution. We must each recognize the role we must play towards the attainment of these constitutional provisions. One of the functions that the Pan-South African language is entrusted with is monitoring the observance of the constitutional provisions regarding the use of language in the country. In such monitoring, in such monitoring, PenSalb is required to examine the content, the observance of any existing and new legislation, practice, and policy that deal with language matters at any level of government. Hence, I'm already pronouncing to you that very soon, if what we're trying to do doesn't work, we'll come and seek your intervention. This is reiterated in the use of Official Languages Act, whereby national government departments, national public entities, and public enterprises are obligated to report on the use of official languages to the Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture and the Pan-South African Language Board. Regrettably, as the board, we continue to be met with challenges in the execution of our monitoring role, some of which is created by the lack of enforcement powers entrusted on the board, which needs urgent remedial legislation measures to be put in place to ensure compliance with these constitutional provisions. That is so because when we say, do you have a language policy? Do you have a language unit? Are you translating? What languages are you translating and all the stuff? Some do say that we are up to here, others, they just keep quiet. So we don't have the teeth to bite. So we will soon be endeavoring into the process of maybe amending our act so that it gives us more powers to deal with that. The language mandate is a vast and expensive field. It is only through focused partnership, collaborations, and the recognition of collective responsibility that we can begin to move towards a society that is reflective of its people and one that ensures equitable access to services and government information in the language of the people. We must promote good language management to meet the needs of our people and for our languages to enjoy parity of esteem. Our Constitution demands it. We must reflect honestly on our progress as a collective thus far and commit to adopting policies and language practices that are responsive to societal needs. As a board, we are very pleased that UNESCO has declared the years 2022 to 2032 as the decades of indigenous languages, which will place much needed global focus on the plight of endangered indigenous languages, which we hope will result in the adoption of high impact interventions that are necessary to save the Khoi, Nama, and San languages, such as the new language, which currently only has one speaker in the name of Oma Katrina, or rather, let me say, one fluent or competitive speaker in the name of Oma Katrina. We also continue to lobby for the officialization of the South African Sign Language and the promotion and protection of the linguistic human rights of the deaf community in all sectors of society, including the adoption of the key pledges set out in the South African Language Sign Charter. We trust that this forum will be conducted on a continuous basis to provide a platform and an opportunity for us to share ideas and work together towards achieving our constitutional mandate. Ndo, I suppose I didn't even take 5 minutes.
Mr. Medawa, I'm pleased that we had a chat earlier. But thank you for reminding us that language is an emotive issue. I also find the choice of words quite profound. When you talk about the sense of belonging, that's very profound, because in many instances, our people do not find themselves. So you use the word a sense of belonging and also the sense of feeling represented. And Minister, Mr. Mudau was almost suggesting that you may need some more powers to make sure that South Africans feel that there's a sense of belonging, that South Africans also feel represented. Now I have a challenge of having to ask Dr. Professor Wally Sorote not to sit down. Professor Wally Sorote, you came at the right time to come and tell us how do you advance language development through the National Poet Laureate Project. That is right.
Program Director, thank you very much. DG, very good to see you. I think my agenda has already been defined by the Program Director. Let me say an epic poem by the Poet Laureate Sikahlela UOR, with a preface by the former President of South Africa, President Thabo Mbeki, was published in October 1990. It is a tribute and praise poem to one of the most outstanding freedom fighters and leaders in our country, the late President of the African National Congress, Oliver Reginald Tambo. This epic poem is the inaugural creative statement of both the National Poet Laureate and the Hub. The Poet Laureate Hub, which is now 18 months old, is becoming a platform upon which the diverse culture of our nation and country is being promoted through poetry and other art forms. The Hub was launched during the most challenging months of the national COVID-19 lockdown 5 period. As with the political, social, and economic challenges and regression in our country, which have been described as state capture by the Zondo Commission, and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, both are still threatening to reverse the gains of the liberation struggle in our country. The pandemic's negative impact on the economic, social, and cultural milieu of our nation and country have been greatly negative, as all of us know. As everyone else may imagine and knows, this is not only anti-social moments, but they are the most challenging spiritually, politically, psychologically, culturally, and economically for everyone in the nation. May all those who passed and are passing during this most trying times due to this pandemic and the insurgency which manifested in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng recently sleep peacefully, and may the hundreds of families in our country accept our heartfelt condolences, as may those who lost their loved ones on the continent and in the world through the pandemic. It is my view that as we examine and explore one of the most important cultural expressions, language, we must also contextualize it correctly and properly. If language is eventually the career of culture, and if culture can be the determinant of history, language becomes the expression and the pillar which is a determinant to whether nations stand or fall. That because it can also become a determinant of culture and therefore of history as expressed and articulated through language. All we need to imagine is how language informed revolutionary songs in our country and what they did to our hearts and minds. It is this which defines language as one of the human rights principles which defines the freedoms of peoples. It was with this consideration that the Democratic Parliament of our country passed the Pan-South African Language Board Bill, which defined the 11 national languages in our country. In consideration of all of this, the past 18 months of the hub was to focus on and mobilize the youth from different backgrounds and language groups in Gauteng. The youth were selected on the basis of their art form, skills, and practices. While not being stringent on content of the artwork and form, the ground rule was that by all means, we must seek to be creative, not just for the sake of it. We were guided by the constitution of our country in this regard. A great deal of improvisation was engaged and used to reach out to the creatives in their homes or places of work through video and photographs, through their computers and cell phones. All this to ensure that we overcome first and foremost the pandemic characteristics, the pandemic challenges, as also through visuals. Please excuse me. A great deal of improvisation was engaged and used to reach out to the creatives in their homes or places of work through videos and photographs, through their computers and cell phones. All this to ensure that we overcome first and foremost the pandemic challenges, as also through visuals, theater, dance, we enhanced the word and reached out to the nation. Given the medium of articulation and expression, it must be said, and given that all of this which was being done had not been done before, for example, under the pandemic challenges, the easy route to take the easy route to take language-wise was through the English medium. We believe that because of the historical, political, and cultural content and context as expressed in the introduction, and of the expression of the poetry and the arts, for instance, the heritage sites, which were used as a backdrop to give the historical and cultural content and context, English itself as a language was being educated out of Europe into the African context. This is the role of culture of peoples and in their differences. This is very important, and we shall come back to that, the importance of the cultural expression and the linguistic expressions and articulations which emanate from and which articulate a specific historical expression, experience, and culture. Suffice for now to say that that body of created cultural expression, while it must articulate the specifics of South African cultural experience and expression, we do not forget that it is also an expression of the common human experience, All of this is the content of language. It has been with that backdrop that the hub, while on the one hand it had to speak to the South African context, it also had to find the manner to speak to the human context. The website of the hub, which is the South African window of South Africa through the arts to the world, speaks English for now, but the podcasts, which will soon inform the website, have so far spoken in Tshivenda, Xitsonga, Setswana, isiXhosa, isiZulu, and Afrikaans. Given the challenges of some of the languages, like isiNdebele, the Khoisan languages, dialects, and others which may face extinction, the hub, guided by the consideration of the Department of Basic Education to begin to teach Kiswahili, has entered into discussions with RSA-based Kiswahili institutions based in Pretoria and the one in Cape Town at the University of the Western Cape. The question to ask is, how do we ensure that all the 9 African languages of South Africa, through their history, culture, and social contents, can imbue Kiswahili with that and those experiences? This postulation is based on the work which the African Union Language Institution, which is based in Bamako in Mali, has thus far suggested. To their advantage, informed by the political concept of divide and rule, the colonialists determined and decided that the languages in Africa are 2,000. The Institute has differed with them. The Institute has reduced that number considerably. For instance, we can conceptually develop a consciousness which says that African languages in South Africa are not 9, but 2. That is Sesotho and Isinguni. If this enhances the diversity and content of language expression and positive cultural growth and national unity and cohesion, the impact is the creation of a new nation buttressed by positive cultural growths. This must not mean that the other languages are diminished in stature and presence, but also this must not mean that those languages will not be protected. They must, as is the case now, be protected by the constitution of the country. Let them be spoken, as also Kiswahili is promoted and informed by those languages which may become, in time, extinct. In partnership with Kiswahili language, with the Kiswahili Language Institute, under the leadership of Tanzanian based in Pretoria, the hub will soon exchange in the first place in classical anthologies, one from South Africa to be translated from English to Kiswahili and performed in Tanzania, and one from Tanzania written in Kiswahili to be prepared for performances next Africa Month in May in South Africa. Both poems will be contextualized in the heritage institution or sites which are national in character in the two different countries. The performances will be lodged on the websites of the two organizations for cross-pollination of either of the countries involved. The website and the social media in general have provided bounds of possibilities, not without challenges, but also with great possibilities. While the key is to maintain the participation of the youth in this regard, it is also extremely important to engage the veteran creatives. The principle here must be informed by the appreciation of the possibilities of a positive cross-pollination, as also the dynamism inherent in the character of diversity expressed by this experience is consciously enhanced and consistently focused upon. In its next activities in poetry and other art forms, as they are used to explore and to affirm the strength and role of diversity, as it's so aptly illustrated in nature through color and form, species types, moods and structure and purpose. The combination of youth and veteran execution is a building block for the future of our country and the future of our continent, and a contribution to human experience. While the reach of the social media to far-flung countries is important, it is important also not to lose the human presence, especially when using the performing arts. That also because the majority of people in our country and on the continent may not only not have access to social media and to the instruments and means used for the projection of culture. However, a full advantage must be taken where the means are affordable and available to reach out to the hearts and minds of the human race, as also the creative spirit is conjured to not give up, but to continuously explore the means informed by purpose to reach out and enter into dialogue, not only with ourselves, but with the world. The South African theatre has given us one-handers and two-handers, as it has also given us the possibilities to do the most with as minimum props as possible. We also have not shied away from outside open performances, as our websites and what we have contributed to the YouTube will show. We intend to use as many of the heritage sites of our country as possible as props. Our eye at this point is also on Voortrekker Monument, the Vrou Museum in Bloemfontein, and the monument in the Tal Monument in the Cape. Ngome and the Blood River complex in proximity in KZN are daring challenges. They are not only to express who we once were, they are also asking for us to note the bizarre possibility of history and culture expressing themselves negatively in repeat form. How they ask us, will we be able to find peace and joy from the colors of the rainbow, from the colors of the flowers of Namaqualand, and the at times raging waves of the seas, as nature in its eloquence shapes joy in our hearts with its diverse character. The hub is in search of this natural heritage and how through the artificial intelligence instruments it can take them and bring them through a myriad of South African languages into sitting rooms, bedrooms, and home lounges, even in the squatter areas, through their cell phones to touch the hearts and minds of people there and bestow peace. And to say in poems, in the diversity of languages, it is in diversity mainly that a variety of possibilities can emerge and stare us in the eye, but also that it is in diversity within its being a myriad of forms that we can also find us and find the similarities which can seek new vocabularies from us and creativity. We can also find new terminologies to reshape our languages and therefore to also reshape our culture and create the possibilities to articulate both the positive and negative histories which must teach us. It is this culture which we are able to shape as masters of history, which becomes a context shaped by us through our efforts, which make us discover who we are and who we want to be and must be given our history and objective reality. Knowing this, then, it is incumbent upon us from our different perspectives that we must aspire to seek the possibilities which must shape our circumstances for the better. That is the National Poet Laureate project. The foundation phase is about to be completed. We have touched collectives of youth in Gauteng by experimenting on communication through the diverseness of art forms, but also through the diverseness of social media. We have also encouraged the diversity of languages to express who we are by partnering with other creatives in KZN and Eastern Cape so as to be educated about the national nuances which define our culture and who we are. The hub is also in partnership with the Defend Our Democracy and Defend Our Constitution broad front, which is slowly emerging, gaining momentum and strength, and to strength from developing from strength to strength in the country across political trends, needs, and interest. While this is in the early stages of the hub in this regard, it is already evident and possible that besides the program of this movement becoming a reference point to further seek the means for communication across languages and culture, and therefore reference in diversity, the greatest challenge is forever going to be when and which languages to use. It is also curious to know and realize that while our country has introduced the simultaneous interpretation facilities, which were highly used one time, they are used less and less, and that more and more live and on the spot interpretations are now popular. Both the on the spot and simultaneous interpretation facilities must become props and backdrops when some art performances are mounted. The platform which cage the interpretation facilities are curious little spaces which dare humanity to be more creative, to sort out the differences which are at times so threatening but also so challenging. While it may be most tempting to say that what is in a language, the weight of what a language is prohibits even a thought, leave alone to state the case to minimize the importance of language. If as we should, we become conscious of the fact that languages are a life and living means of human beings, we would make all possibilities for all to speak their languages and for all to know and speak others' languages. That because languages do not only define who the speakers think they are, but that they also define who they do not want to be. We would come to terms as peoples with the fact that no space can be empty of human beings. When human beings are present and want and need to be present, they are present and will always be present. That is why the advancing of the South African languages through the National Poet Laureate project must not be looked at as a nicety, but as a necessity. While we are very conscious and aware of the complexities of language issues in our country, besides the fact that we know and have been told by history that language can build nations, but also that language can tear nations apart and into smithereens. We note that music is made up of different notes, but also that in the hands of creatives disciplined by skill, the different notes become food of the hearts and minds of the people. To conclude, as the diverse notes caress and hold each other and speak and ring and sing in the air in harmony, they do inspire nations, they do inspire people. As promised above, I accept and expect that our creativity will be informed by the 12 languages, including the sign language of our nation, and that is unique to our country. However, because we are human, our history is human, and therefore we are of humanity. So also our creativity will succinctly be and state. I thank you for your indulgence. Thank you, President Director.
Here's a phone. Take your phone. Your phone. Minister, I was given a clear instruction to ensure that all speakers are going to stick to the time. And when I repeated this, Professor Sorote was not in the house. So I would say that is an excuse, DG, for not keeping to the promise. But if he was in the house, and if it took longer, as he did, I would have said that given that he's a veteran, there's a challenge of hard of hearing. But the veteran Sorote, thank you very much for that presentation, and most importantly for reminding us that language development is also a decolonial project, for reminding us that it is in language that you were able to craft revolutionary songs, for also reminding us about the dialectical relationship between the specific and the general, that in as much as we talk about language in South Africa, it is also about understanding that we must also talk about the language of humanity, and that that dialectical relationship is important. And of course, we ventured into other areas that will require scholastic debate about the harmonization, standardization, and the whole notion of the power of Babel. Minister and ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to beg your indulgence that even though this was supposed to be a tea break, we've got only a few more speakers, and we'll then take the minister so that when we go for a tea break, we start reflecting on what other speakers and the minister had said. And then next time we'll take, we'll have moments of deliberations and engagement. Without much ado, I don't know whether we have Beverly Thomas as a submission. I'm told that it will be presented via video link. Are the people in charge ready to assist? If not, while they're still busy with that, may we move to Michael Jonas from the CEO of African Style Museum to come and talk about how the Style Museum advances the literary archives. Mr. Michael Jonas. Is Mr. Michael Jonas here? Oh.
Yeah, I was supposed to present after the break. So I'm without my notes now, because for the technical guys, we're supposed to do it. But what I'll do is, seeing that a lot of time has been taken, well, firstly, thank you, Program Director, Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, members of the public sector, all protocols observed. It is indeed a great opportunity for the Afrikaans Taal Museum and Monument to give you an insight in terms of how we apply the language policy and what kind of projects we are involved in. Okay, for the purposes of my presentation and trying to stick to 5 minutes, I'll basically concentrate on, firstly, can you move? Yeah, language and literary works in South Africa. Just 5 points. What is a language museum? Because my colleague from Amwazi was going to look at what is a literary museum, and then give you a brief introduction into the workings of the Afrikaans Taal Museum and Monument, and progress made in terms of how we preserve our literary collections within the institution, and lastly, some closing remarks. Okay, so basically, that's a statement. So language is central to the ability, and of course, the readers can read far faster than I do. But bottom line, the point I would like to make with my first slide is that the existing literary collections are dominated by English and Afrikaans. And it's due to the fact that the English and Afrikaans language, the privileged position they had in the previous government. But what is important, another reason for the two languages, in this case Afrikaans, is, of course, it was published in newspapers, in books, and it was elevated from a spoken language, a lingua franca, to a language of literacy and education. And previous speakers has alluded to the fact, within a space of 35 years, Afrikaans was able to be elevated from a kitchen language, from kitchen Dutch, to one of the youngest international languages, which is spoken in the church, commerce, schools, and at university level. Despite all the constitutional arrangements and provisions, indigenous literature is still underdeveloped. And just to create the contrast between a literary museum and a language museum, a language museum is a museum developed actually, I can't read now because it's too far. But basically, we deal with specific issues. And our issues is a bit broader than just literacy and books. And we deal with political issues, we deal with economic issues, we deal with social issues and so forth. And that definition is taken from the Center of the Norwegian Language and Literary Museum. So that brings us to my institution, or our institution, the Afrikaanse Taal Museum and Monument. The idea of a monument and a museum for a language originated in 1942. The museum was opened on the 14th of August 1975, the monument on the 10th of October 1975. Museum 100 years after the establishment of the Genootskap of Regte Afrikaners. I'll speak later on the movement. And the monument 50 years after the language received official status next to Dutch and English. Okay, that's the monument. The monument is located on 101 hectares of indigenous vegetations against the slopes of Paarl Mountain. So apart from dealing with, it portrays and symbolizes the development and the establishment and development of us as Afrikaans as a language. And it also illustrates and symbolizes the diverse origins of the language, which basically took place over 3 continents, from Europe, Africa, and from the East. As a Creole language that was established at the tip of Africa, it's a lingua franca for diverse audiences to be able to communicate. Okay. So, visa statements, and here I would like to place the focus on linguistic diversity. According to Stats South Africa's 2018 census, Afrikaans is the third most spoken language in the country. And that culture, the linguistic diversity could fall onto 2 layers. The one dealing with is the indigenous language with the largest racial diversity of all indigenous languages in the country. It is mother tongue to close to 8 million speakers for first language speakers and first additional or second language speakers. And of course, on another level of diversity, we have different variants of the language. And of course, these days, there's a movement where the way people speak on the Cape Flats is taking sort of momentum with Afrikaans, where there's the possibility of having a dictionary for one of the variants, Afrikaans. But as Kaapse Afrikaans, there's Orange River Afrikaans. And the language, the variant you would listen to at television, that would be a standardized version of one of the variants of Afrikaans. But as a language and institution, we embrace this diverse origins of our languages. But what's important also is that we recognize the influence of indigenous languages on Afrikaans and vice versa. And as an institution, we would like to create a dynamic, inclusive institution that serves all these communities. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of our collections, we've got artifacts and of course a paper-based collection. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'll focus on the paper-based collection. And so it deals with the founding history of the museum in the form of agendas and minutes of those planning committees. But it also deals with the formation of the Genootskap of Regte Afrikaners. And this is a very controversial history because that particular organization, the Association of True Afrikaners, they were responsible for the first and second language movement. And their purpose was basically, they would like to elevate Afrikaans as an official language. But firstly, it had to be written, the Bible had to be written in Afrikaans. That was the purpose. But along with the elevation of Afrikaans as an official language, it was also the empowerment of the Afrikaner as a nation. So that was the sort of the start of the official narrative. But the narrative of Afrikaans dates back to 1595. And language practitioners would tell you that was the first language contact between the European sailors and the local Khoi. And your first 25 words in Afrikaans was written in 1625, long before the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck. Woorde soos wat, water, brood, brokwa, and so forth. Yeah, and around, the Genootskap was formed in 1875, but around 1860s, we already had the earliest forms of written Afrikaans in the form of a koplesboeken or the notebooks or surats. What basically happened is that children from Islam, well, with the Islam religion, had to receive religious instructions in their home language, but they had to write it in Arabic. So special symbols was designed, and that was the first written form of Afrikaans. And we are privileged and fortunate to have at least 3 koplesboeken, which was donated by the late Dr. Ahmad Davids, who was an expert on Afrikaans in the Boerkaap. And then we can carry on. So we also concentrate on the archive concentrates on the cultural history of Afrikaans-speaking people. And then we have the biggest collections, our New Neighbor collection, the Bosman collection, books, Bibles, and of course libraries of those people in the Genootskap van Verregte Afrikaners. But our latest projects, we concentrate for the last 10 years, we've been doing oral history recordings in the Northern Cape. We record the Orange River or the Garib variant of the language. We've also started, as part of our bottom-up approach, started to interview the builders of the monument, and that in itself became a space of multilingualism and multicultural because they use trekarbeids, migrant workers. That was a whole sort of cosmopolitan workforce that assisted in building this iconic monument. Okay, and in terms of managing, you can carry on, please. Yeah, and since April 2018, we're busy digitizing our collections, and that is basically the results. And this collection is, of course, managed in terms of international and museological best practices. And the whole idea is that we would like to make it accessible to all to have access to this information. In closing, Program Director, firstly, indigenous languages and literary archives needs urgent renewal, revitalizations, and empowerment to survive. That's important. And we also need political will that will promote and facilitate the process of the implementation of the language policy. And we also need proper, adequate allocations in order to perform our duties and preserve these important works in accordance with the set international museological standards. But at the same time, I need to give credit to the Free State provincial government, who's responsible for the funding of the Nasionale Afrikaanse Literaire Museum and Literature Research Center. But both private and public institutions has got a role to play. And there's a list within the Afrikaans sector, there's a list of private organizations currently busy with private initiatives, privately funded initiatives, where they're creating new works, literary works, and new archives. And that's institutions like the digital platform like the Nice Museum, ILAF, the Indigenous Language Action Forum, the Afrikaanse Taalraad. They're all busy with initiatives in order to preserve the literacy and heritage of the Afrikaans language. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jonas, for keeping time. And I think your presentation came at the right time when we now call Professor Kashuda. He'll be talking about capacity building and how we can promote it. It links very closely to what Mr. Jonas was talking about in terms of how Africans moved from being what he calls kitchen Dutch to becoming a language of science and technology. But also thanks for making a distinction for us between the Literary Museum and the Tal Museum, that the one also deals with issues that are political, economic. And as Professor Koshula comes, the minister will start preparing himself to giving us another line of march.
Molweni bantu basekhaya, ndiyabulisa. Goeiemorgen. Good morning, everybody. I see the minister has has left his chair, but I'm going to speak about him in his absence. In any event, and hopefully we can convey what I'm going to be saying to him. I will not incriminate myself in any way. But firstly, I'd just like to express my gratitude for being here today. And I think I stand here as a humble servant of our universities and to speak about the bursaries in language practice that have been coordinated through the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. I had the singular honor of being involved with these bursaries from 2009 up to the present day at the University of the Western Cape. And Minister, really, I think we owe you a great sense of gratitude for allowing these bursaries to continue and to flourish and to create a throughput of students in African language studies over the years, students that speak to the challenges that we face in this country, and students that speak to the societal needs that we have in the workplace in South Africa. Many of these students that have been through the language practice program have basically become announcers on television. Many of them are working in Parliament as language practitioners. Many of them have gone on to get doctorates in African language studies and have allowed us to reposition the study of African languages at various institutions. And I think we have to thank the Minister for that and for taking us out of the comfort zone of policy frameworks and allowing us to actually implement the policy frameworks contained in the Act of 2012 and even the Constitution. Just by way of illustration, in 2012 at Rhodes University, when I was there, we had these bursaries in place, and we had graduated over 100 students from 2009 to 2012. Those were honors students and master's students who had a good grounding in language and technology, human language technology, translation studies, and various translation, interpreting, as well as forensic linguistics now that we've added at the University of the Western Cape. So it's basically taking language studies and making it more practical, and therefore these students are much more employable. And I think this program has really let us flourish. In 2012, at the Rhodes University, which, as you know, is a traditionally, well, let me not go into the history of the university. The name will tell you itself what the university, the challenges that it faces. But in 2012, we produced the most honors graduates in the Faculty of Humanities in African Language Studies. We graduated 30 honors students, and it was more than the huge departments like the Faculty of Media Studies and Journalism and Sociology and so on. So again, Minister, just to say, without your leadership in this program of language practice and the bursaries that have been made available, we would not have had this constant stream of graduates that we are producing. And that particular segment of the program produced over 100 students. As I speak today at the University of the Western Cape, we have 51 students that are benefiting from these bursaries. So the numbers are there and they speak for themselves. You've allowed us to basically implement rather than to focus on policy. rather to take the policy and to implement it. And we're very grateful for that as the university community. These bursaries have moved from Wusu to Fort Hare, to Nelson Mandela, to Rhodes, to University of the Western Cape, and many other universities. So I stand here representing those universities and thanking you as well, and the department for your leadership. And I think in terms of future endeavors, we could possibly think about a terminology hub where we can coordinate the terminology that's being created, because we do kind of work in our own little silos, and I think we need some consolidated effort there to move us along, and also to create dictionaries and catalogs of terminology that are accessible. We can't just rely on the web and on the internet to allow this terminology to be made available, because many of us don't have access to those kinds of sites. So I think that would be something to do in the future. And also, if we're going to create a culture of reading, to translate works from languages into African languages, in the same way that Sweden has translated English literary texts into Swedish, for example, we should be doing the same in South Africa and making that cheaply available as well. And lastly, I think we need to learn to collaborate as well. And the future for us should be collaborations between universities, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, Department of Higher Education, Department of Basic Education, NGOs, and outside stakeholders like UNESCO and so on. That, for me, would be the future and where we should be going. And we're very grateful for the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture with this collaborative project that has been so beneficial to our students at our universities. And language is pivotal to the future of this country, as has been spoken about by other speakers as well, because with language, we can have the ability to create social cohesion. So it's central to building an active, creative, winning, and socially cohesive society. If I, for example, was not able to speak isiXhosa, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. And I'm very grateful to my ancestors on both sides of my family for allowing that process to happen. And I wish that we could all be multilingual, because a multilingual citizen is a better citizen. Enkosi kakhulu.
Yeah, Prof, I would like to join you in expressing a sense of appreciation for the support that the ministry has provided for students who would not have been in this space. And I must say, DG, for reasons that are unclear, post-1994, we saw the devaluation of African languages. So the support that emerges from the ministry helps in making sure that the development of African language does not become an idea, it also becomes a reality. And the students who are benefiting from the bursaries would actually be the ones to tell you that they are very grateful. So I'm pleased that, Prof, you were able to put that to the minister on behalf of all the universities. And I also agree with you that perhaps the idea of collaboration as punted also by the department is a very good one. The idea of a terminology hub, the idea of translation, because that is the fastest way in which you can also ensure that languages develop. With that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Natim Tetwa, to give us a line of march.
Thank you so much, Prof, and good morning to everyone. Well, I always remind people that that we are in Africa, and we are Africans. When somebody greets you, you respond in this continent. Sanbonan. That sounds better. Molweni. Dumelang. Ndawyando. Apshe. Thank you so much. And thanks our program director. In fact, the program directors, because the other program directors not come to the fore, Professor Siepe and Professor Dr. Mohabi here. And I want to greet all of you, different institutions, individuals, leaders, everyone is a distinguished guest here in this meeting, from government to institutions of higher learning, from our entities of government, to every one of you. We meet today still in challenging times for the world community and all of us, particularly here in South Africa. And we're confronted with having to safeguard human lives, protect our planet, putting the needs of people first, and focusing on limiting environmental footprints. I want to note that this gathering is really enriching because we have a whole scope from the youth to the veterans. One of them was addressing us here, and the program director didn't say kind things to the veteran. I want to jump into the defense of veterans, like Professor Serote here, to very young ones of the Rhodes Must Fall movement here with us, Veda and the team, and also as a country. We're still dealing with stubborn legacies of colonialism, apartheid, which manifests itself in poverty, in unemployment, and in inequality. In the midst of these challenges, we continuously work towards economic growth and development, social progress, and the flourishing of our culture and our languages. We do this in our daily activities. We are still curtailed in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. We act in circumstances where community life must still continue and where we must still make progress in our various localities, because to embrace our languages and our indigenous cultural expressions is to give a message to the world that to protect and sustain ourselves, we must begin to do so at the local level. The democracy that is at the heart of our political system and which we renewed at local government with the holding of our 6th municipal elections last week must work in favor of our people. We must act to sustain our collective and community needs, and to do so with the shared consciousness that we depend on our planet for our daily survival. Noam Chomsky, a foremost intellectual, is in an early essay writes of the importance of language and freedom. And I quote, "I think that the study of language can provide some glimmerings of understanding of rule-governed behavior and the possibilities for free and creative action within the framework of a system that rules that in part at least reflect intrinsic properties of human mental organization. He continues that just as we study the range of humanly attainable languages with some success, we might also try to study the forms of artistic expression, or for that matter, scientific knowledge that humans can conceive, and perhaps even the range of ethical systems and social structures in which humans can live and function, given their intrinsic capacities and needs. Perhaps one might go on to protect a concept of social organization that would, under given conditions of material and spiritual culture, best encourage and accommodate the fundamental human need. If such it is for spontaneous initiative, creative work, solidarity, pursuit of social justice, close quote. Chomsky's fundamental philosophical conception of language in particular and artistic expression in general point us to the importance of why we are gathered here today. Our languages are the tools of communication and the means through which we deliver our services to our people, but language is also more than a tool, as it shapes the self-understanding through which we develop and sustain ethics and build our social structures. Our languages are more than the means through which we conceptualize and carry out our creative work and through which we reach out to others in acts of solidarity and in pursuit of social justice. So the presence of so many of us in this meeting and in this room in particular from around the country is because of your commitment to language and is also a commitment to justice. We thank you for your presence, and we know that what has brought you here is a sense of urgency, that more progress needs to be made to advance our languages and so that our languages can advance us, as we need to be able to access all public services in the official languages of our choice, and we need to be able to initiate, conceptualize, and develop intellectual content in all our languages. There is nothing scientific in that a particular language cannot develop its content in whichever way, scientific and otherwise. This first gathering is therefore very important as we set the tone for a shared engagement to advance a common agenda. And we can only do so by looking first at how far have we come. Rest assured that this forum is not ours alone, but belongs to our stakeholders, and future such forums will become a way in which together we interrogate our progress, assert new possibilities, share best practice, pose new challenges, and seek to solve them. The of the forum reflects, and I quote, the year of Charlotte Mannya Maxeke, advancing South Africa's official languages and strengthening the language practice. As this year commemorates 150 years after the birth of one of South Africa's great heroines, a remarkable linguist herself, an educationist, and a visionary woman, often referred to as the mother of Black freedom, Umama Maxeke, whose life's work gave hope to the dejected and remains an inspiration to all of us in her tireless pursuit of emancipation, of education, and African unity. We must not forget that her generation was inspired also by the struggles of our sisters and brothers in the African diaspora, and that together they laid the foundations for our freedom and for gender empowerment. They were inspired too by attainments of prior generations. The battles of Isandlana, battles of Adwa spurred them on the stories of Toussaint Louverture and the first Black Republic of San Domingo in Haiti, where they are landmarks towards our liberation. The world they live in was perhaps even more perilous than the one we live in today. We forget that the year in which she formed the Bantu Women's League in 1918 was the same year that the Spanish flu ravaged the world. It was also the same year that our icon, Madiba, was born. Yet, this organization, the Bantu Women's League, grew and shaped itself as the forerunner of what is known today as the African National Congress Women's League. Their generation was aware of that dreaded Berlin Conference of 1884 that is commemorated, and those who commemorate and celebrate it in few days on the 15th of November had plunged Africa into human tragedy. As imperialists carved up the African continent, separating connected people and classifying them according to their empires who conquered them in various European languages. In this way, English, French, and Portuguese became languages of oppression, and Africans were systematically deprived of the free use of their native languages and dispossessed of their land and liberty. What confronts us today is to go back to that very process of developing these languages. And we've got to be deliberate, and more especially because this august gathering today is talking about how do we advance, how do we practically put into action the policies, the compendium of policies which we've had since 1994. And I've noticed, Prof, that as we talk about developing especially the 9 official languages out of the 11, because at least the 2, which is English and Afrikaans, had its fair share of development. One of the areas is that the museums, the research institutes have been at the core of developing these languages. And languages are not going to develop on their own. That they are in the constitution today, especially the African languages, is not going to fly on their own and just get developed. We're going to come back on the same question unless we are practical. One of the ways Professor has covered here is that we believe that we need to invest in languages practically. That is why our department every year we give bursaries to students in languages, not less than 400 throughout the country and in almost all the universities of this country, because we understand the importance of language. We understand that we ought to do something than just declarations and policies which we have in abundance. It is against this backdrop that earlier on, when we're given the responsibility to preside over this portfolio, one of our entities then, the National English Language Museum, which is in Makanda, one place which was, again, wrongly named because of colonialism, with that butcherer and killer, Graham. I'm glad that they were fought that battle. Now it's Makanda. Now, this National English Literary Museum, I then said to DG and the team, we ought to do something. For social cohesion to be realized in this country, there are practical things we need to do. We can't have a purely English museum, notwithstanding the fact that English has developed over years. English museum situated in a place where 80% of people speak isiXhosa and say that is normal. And I said, if we are to transform, if we are to make an intention known about transformation and ensuring that we build in the true sense social cohesion, this museum can't be English museum. It cannot remain as English museum. This is how Amazwi South African Museum of Literature came into being. We no longer have English museum because we said that part of the mandate of the museum should be about developing isiXhosa. So that's what the mandate is now. We've changed the mandate from 40 years ago when the museum was developed, and have it as Amazwi today. And we want to do more of those, especially from the regional point of view, that African languages should benefit, should be deliberately developed. And we as government have to take a leading role, and we're doing just that. Now, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who's one of my guest of honor in 2017 in our program of Africa Month, has written succinctly on this dreaded Berlin conference, because I think our people should not forget this conference. It is this conference which spurred some of the Pan-Africanists to hold that inaugural Pan-African conference, the likes of Henry Sylvester Williams, W.E.B. Du Bois, and so on, who, by the way, were very much in touch. In fact, Du Bois was one of the lecturers of Ma Charlotte Maxeke. Now, this is what he had to say about this Berlin, because it's the basis of all the problems we want to solve today, be it in language, be it in discrimination, be it in self-hate as Africans, and so on. And Ngugi says, Berlin of 1884 was effected through the sword and the bullet. But the night of the sword and the bullet was followed by the morning of the chalk and blackboard. I don't know, do you know the blackboard? The physical violence of the battlefield was followed by the psychological violence of the classroom. But where the former was visibly brutal, the latter was visibly gentle. The bullet was the means of physical subjugation. Language was the means of the spiritual subjugation, close quote. The colonial era during which Ma Maxeke lived had degraded indigenous languages and promoted Eurocentric cultural views, which did not only deprive African people of their cultural identity, but made them pay allegiance to the imperialist conquerors and empires imposed on them through coercion, slavery, wars of conquest, and resistance, and through colonialism, segregation, and apartheid. Thus, even our efforts here today and our work are acts of reclamation, restoration, and decolonization, so that the languages of our education are the languages of our cultures, so that the languages of our daily existence, are the same languages we can access services in and reimagine our futures through knowledge and cultural production. This becomes doubly important in the world where the development of technologies, and especially artificial intelligence, take place predominantly from the viewpoints of developed countries and therefore are not ideologically neutral. In recent years, the ethics of their work have also come under question, and some argue that racism has been built into the very systems intended to empower people. In fact, the signs are evident that those who have been able to take advantage of the fruits of the fourth industrial revolution, those who own technologies powering the digital economy, and those who own the platforms, the digital infrastructure and vast networks, those who have already pooled the creative talent of digital developers and content creators, have enriched themselves during this global period of physical distancing. Yes, in order to overcome the digital divide and the attainment of universal access to ICTs, we have a long way to go to cover the masses of the world's people. The virtual world also serves to distract from the real physical needs of people and detract from the conditions of those working communities who mine and extract the raw material from which such digital possibilities arise. Our priorities, therefore, have been multifold. South Africa had adopted the most progressive constitutional language provisions on the African continent, if not the world. Our constitution enshrines multilingualism, where 11 languages of South African population are recognized as official languages, where all three spheres of government who are part of this very engagement here today are required to use previously marginalized African languages in delivering services to their citizens. Various legislation has been passed to effect multilingualism. The Use of Official Languages Act of 2012 is a cornerstone of service delivery as well as an enabler of public participation. The department has appointed an advisory committee which has as its task to process of establishing the South African Language Practitioners Council as a way of strengthening the language fraternity. This is a much needed structure to regulate the language profession. All these legal frameworks serve as bedrocks for citizens to get quality services in their languages of choice. Sign language is a mother language to deaf community, and there is no longer other language that they can use to express themselves, and they never had any. We welcome the work of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, who are tasked with the reviewing of Section 6 of the Constitution to include the South African Sign Language as the 12th South African official language. Whilst this process is in place, departments should make necessary preparations so that when it's pronounced, we are not found wanting. It's not pronounced and it becomes just an academic exercise. Work in our national language service focuses on the translation of government documents, the development of terms of all our languages, the development of human language technologies, and providing bursaries, as we have just said. We acknowledge the challenges in coordinating terminology nationally, and this has been coming up from speaker to speaker in this podium today. A national terminology bank, which will host terminology projects initiated by the department and its stakeholders. This will become a pillar in the development of language archives, especially in indigenous languages. I'm glad Ms. Dooley spoke about this, especially about the aspect of archiving our work relating to languages, because one of the thespian in this country who passed on just a few years ago, Maxeke, once said to me, you know, Minister, this work of language is very important. You don't want in future, the future generations, referring to their mother language, say that our parents used to speak Xhosa, because they no longer speak it. But it's also us as parents who are contributing to that. Because I'll come and visit Ndao at home, and when I, greet his son or daughter, it's him who will say first, sorry, Minister, he doesn't understand the language. I mean, this is Themba. You are told that Themba cannot speak Xhosa or isiZulu by the parent. So what is the role of society? What is the role of parents in that? And our erstwhile colonizers, they did many things. But one thing they failed to do was to annihilate our languages. But guess what? We are at the forefront of doing that ourselves. After all, we are also what keepers of memory, who need to store our knowledge, our intellectual production in our own granaries. UNESCO has declared International Decade of Indigenous Languages from 2022 to 2032. This proclamation is also a call for action for preservation of indigenous languages and concrete commitments on the status and role of indigenous languages. South Africa will initiate activities from February next year that are meant to recognize the International Decade of Indigenous Languages at various levels. This will strengthen work on indigenous languages and further empower our speakers. Colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, let us all work together to make sure that we do indeed advance our languages, because they can unleash free and creative action of our people, encourage solidarity and the pursuit of social justice. I thank you for your kind attention. Thanks.
Can I take over? Okay. Thanks very much. Yes, I can. Let me look at it. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're gonna have now is a handover of the classics books to the provinces who are here, represented by their language heads. And therefore, we will request that the provinces come here forefront, and then Minister will hand over these books as just a demonstration of what will be provided to them in big boxes where there will be 300 sets of them in each box, and then these will be distributed throughout the libraries in each province so that they can be accessed by the citizens. So, Honorable Minister, can we just ask that before you leave the podium, you hand over to the province of the Free State, their head who represents the Free State, will you please come forth? May I request to make it easy, Minister, that they come here and then Minister just gets closer.
What is it that I'm giving you? Which classic book? Do you have the names there?
No, I don't have the names of the classic. But if you take it as a sheet, it was a state.
Yes, that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
Tell us
It's
if
Free State.
it's Free State. It's evil.
Yeah.
Minister Afunu wants to know what is inside as he hands over. He wants to be able to be declared so that you know when we say classics, but what classic. Otherwise, we might be saying classic. Can't see the daffodils. You remember the daffodils? Dr. Sarah Rawal.
This one was the main. You know that each region or each province has had particular books, which were classic books, so that we help those parents who say that, look, my son doesn't know the language, meaning the son knows English. We decided to reprint most of the classic books. In the area, in the region of Free State, for instance, there is one which he has there, the Tabatsatawana, but I know that they also read a lot of this one. They called it Chaga. That's Free State, and there are others here.
Yes, Minister, it's KwaZulu Natal. Will be followed by Northern Cape.
Yes, KwaZulu Natal. Nazi, Kamba Kubona. Khona ngiyazi ithandwa kakhulu. Sayibo. Nazi sibonene. I having grown up in KwaZulu Natal, I know when you go to the province, talking classic books, there are a lot of them. But if you say Nkinsela yasemkungunlofu, nobody will miss that.
Northern Cape.
Northern Cape. Okay. Let's see. As you can see, his list there. A lot of them. But I know when you talk Mutimedi by Mloto, people would know what you are talking about there.
Mpumalanga.
Mpumalanga, how bad? Mazi kahle. Yes, yes, but this is, yeah, this is mainly the, what's the language? Ndebele. Yeah, that's what
Limpopo.
Hey, in Limpopo, you would have a variety because Limpopo is a United Nations in terms of African languages. But Shisomi-san, I know that one. But in Spain, you'll have Spain. And Kaspedi, Khorong Yamshat, I know.
Eastern Cape.
Okay. Eastern Cape, Puma Colony. No. This is
The United Nations.
no. If ungenayo ilokhuzana diale.
Huh?
They have a bit of angiliboni ityala lamawele la. Azi ithi liphi. Kodwa ke these are some of them. No multimedia because there is a bit of Sotho speaking Eastern Cape. Siyabulele.
Gauteng. Gauteng.
Gauteng. Yeah. You see, we begega. The Mpumalanga one, I know one of them, they left it here. How babe? How babe? Yes, Swat. Ahiko. Yes. Yes, this is how. Yabona, for instance, Eastern Cape, ingumbo yeminyanya. Yeah. The real perspective. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Just before we go to a tea break, DG and the distinguished guest, when in my previous incarnation as an advisor to the minister, when the minister spoke, we took that to be marching orders. So I do think that what the minister provided us at this point was also the marching orders for the next a few years. And the minister correctly reminded us that this event takes place within a particular historical context. And that context is a context of colonialism. And the minister, the statement that you quoted, that language was used during that process of colonialism as an instrument for spiritual subjugation is very profound. Because if you remove people's spirit, then the people cease to exist. But you went further to remind us that as we approach language, there must be the centrality of social justice, which Noam Chomsky spoke about. But our challenge, ladies and gentlemen, as the minister was putting it across, is how do we intellectualize our languages so that our languages become languages of human conception, where we can conceive ideas, because it is at the level of thought that those thoughts can be turned into words, and the words can be turned into action, and action defines a habit, and out of the habit we then have character, and it is in character that defines our destiny. So a nation that does not invest in idea formation is a dead nation. So what the minister was saying is that human nature, we have what we call intrinsic capacities. And it is our duty to find a way in which we can, how do we put it, to practicalize the intellectual and to intellectualize the practical, and also to make the pedagogical more political and vice versa. Minister, we see this as a challenge of the future, that the language development must, as a matter of course, be a language of development, a language in which we are able to conceive scientific concepts, in which we can do what Africans has been able to do. So we have models that we can emulate from Korea, Vietnam, Japan, etc. And the beauty of this is that it is the fastest way in which we can enculturate all the knowledge in the world. As Dade Wali Sorete was saying, that it is, we must move from also the specific to the general. We must also talk about the language in our country in as much as we talk about the language of humanity. With those few words, Minister, thank you very much for taking us down the memory lane, but reminding us that we are part of that decolonial project that Mandela talked about. Remember what Mandela said, which was what the minister was saying as a responsibility, is that when he was a young person, he used to listen to heroic stories about the heroes who were engaged against the anti-colonial struggle. And then he concluded that statement from the doc to say, during my lifetime, I dedicated myself to this African struggle. And this is what the minister was reminding us, that we have a struggle that started with the Berlin Conference. And we have a duty. And as Mandela said, that he wished that history would be so kind that it can be part of that struggle. We are privileged to say we can be part of that struggle. But unlike the Mandelas who went to jail and others who died, we don't have to die. All it requires is effort. And Mr. Jonas, he talked about the political will. I think what the minister was presenting is simply a testament that the political will exists. It is up to us. DG, I think it's time for us to have coffee or tea. Thank you very much for listening. Until I'm told that your breakfast, or what do you call it, not breakfast, but tea, coffee, will be until 12:30. Thank you very much.
There is an idea that we are
retro non-stop.
Is that fine?
Retro non-stop.
Lelo makambo lobi makambo na lembi lelo bitumba lobi koswana na lembi na boyi ko baby sandoto na manzaka na lembi Mario na lembi kende na yo na baye yo o Mario
Ma famille ya Mario bakanisaka Mario apesaka nga mosolo nzoka nga moto na pokoloko naleisaka nalatisaka ye Mario na baye ozongi lisusu nalembi ye obandi kobetenga na baye kende na yo nalembi
aprodinga na pakolaka
nzoto ekoma sembesembe
okobetenga na zoka
lobi nazwa maladi ya kanser
lobi tango na kopola
yo kiminga ye
Mario nalembi kende papa na baye yo o Mario
oh Mario ndeko na ngai ozongeli lisusu mere oyo oka ndenge abandi koloba Mario mwasi mosusu omona atekaka mere oyo biso tokanisi kuta osi oboyi ye ozongeli ye lisusu yango alesa yo nini Mario Mario lukata mosusu papa sango ekei mokili mobimba otika mere oyo te
akobetenga na zuwa akotutanga na zuwa akobetenga na zuwa epai zuwa ya kowiye epai zuwa ya Mercedes akutakinga na yango likambo moke kobomela ngai voiture nako nasomba Mario nalembi ye kende Mario na baye Mario mosala koyanga na ngai bipai ye abimaka lisolo ya komo alinga koyokaka te Mario surtout soki azali esika ya basi ya age na ye Mario nalembi ye bima vire na baye
Mario a changé méthode ya kovanda na mer akoma okende epai ya mer obe na kati ya butu po alingi te bamonaka ye Mario papa ebele ya basi oyo batondi kisasa omoi nano bango te kaka mere yango asala yo boni okisa nzoto no soni yo moto ozwa badiplome ebele Mario c'est pas possible Mario sala tout vraiment
akobetenga na zuwa mama akobetenga na zuwa akobetenga na zuwa epai zuwa ya lokuta epai zuwa ya biloko akutakinga na yango likambo moke mosala koboma biloko ya ndako asomba nalembi ye kende papa na baye yo o Mario
masini ya mandefu biloko ya bato kisanola zongisa Mario
soki mikanda somila
yango Mario ozali etola oboni ochanzaka te Mario mobali ya babe
bana imwa
bana imwa kopesa Mario conseil
esambe
Mario a changé méthode. C'est quoi qu'on parle kaka? Ici, aux États-Unis, a changé poso.
mobali akutinga na bomengo asengi akomanenga na ndimi Mario akutinga na ngenga asengi adirige nga na ndimi na bandiko bima na ye babandi kobenga ye monsieur Mario avimi moto akanisi biloko na Papa mala jana kanye da bilema ali patrola de nama nisonga ni jubuso ile to da bilema fila kolafa nabila la sama koro sama nyimba miala mali koro mali nitwe ture purobe mo konsoro kanofe ijole tureke namina tasiku jole masake alale no ijole tureke mina tasiku jole masake alale no tuwe manemori kuma manemori jana manemori sise manemori kuma maju toya maju hakili maju kariyo yuma maju furayo maju mane katake manu toya bi madriada akone bena mama bi bena mama bi ne bena mama tuguru kangwe jato dile papa le ma ali fatro la de ndama nisonga ni juruso sojigi ya fuduge bere bi papa kono digi ye yiri bolo diala soko digi ye buda ba kolo di papa cheke digi ye papa diala soko digi ye buda ba kolo di papa tunu ya digi ye ndali masadiala manjuwa Ala manjujo samiyo.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Ali mami mamare di ala leno.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Muhammadu kiyaro fa ala leno.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Minatan chini kiyaro fa ala leno.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Aramata koro kebere ala leno.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Nungumba koro kebere ala leno.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Saya sera boko na fama setola.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Aminata kiyaro di ala leno.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Ala manjujo samiyo.
Nifola afokiba ibaleka sababu Nifola alamine tarike ibaleka sababu makike fendi Nifola afokiba ibaleka sababu Nifola alamine tarike ibaleka sababu makike fendi Bengali Bebara lanje tina kona Mo foto jamuna O farara inani fala Iye fola jamuna O farara inani fala De wolo Bebara lanje tina kona Haya de wolo Bebara lanje tina kona Bamba ni fude Nima na wadu ya deni nkanye kamima ya isagla deni nkanye kamima aisha tabundi kele nkanye kamima shaka maula sorofaleko nkanye kamima musasi wotarikele foto sebu hayale wono Bebara lanja tila kula Hayere wolo Bebara lanja tila kula Bangali fode
Wato bangali fode Bangali fode Wato bangali fode Adu fode sele
Mongo saba mongo bisaba Kemenani nimbetebe mongo labo Keni musoluko Adu fode sele nimbetebe
Colleagues, we should be seated by now. Anybody who is still outside of the hall and can hear me, please start walking towards your seats. Okay, I think I'll start. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Molebohe Mohapi. Can you properly hear me at the back? I've got a small voice for somebody who is not so small. My name is Molebohe Mohapi. I am an employee of the Museums of South Africa. I'm responsible for the Natural History Museum, which is just across the street on the other side of the town hall. And I'm also responsible for public programs of the Museums of South Africa. Let me start by thanking a word of gratitude towards my co-host, Professor Siepe, who did a wonderful job earlier on. Thank you so much. I was telling him that I feel like I'm stepping into very big shoes and I'm not sure whether I'll be able to fill those shoes. But I'm a size 9, so maybe I'll survive. I wear size 9. Colleagues, it's difficult to continue when you are speaking at the same time. Please get seated quietly, please. Okay. There is a slight change in the program. If you look at your programs, we're supposed to have Professor Mandla Makanya speaking next. But before Professor Makanya speaks, we have an audio that we are going to play from Mr. Beverly Thomas, who is the CEO of Amazwi. But before that audio is played, I'm just going to give you about 10 minutes to just reflect on earlier talks or earlier presentations. If you've got any comment, if you've got any issues that you want to raise that emerged in those earlier deliberations of the National Language Stakeholder Engagement Forum, I'm going to give you exactly 10 minutes and I'm going to put my phone on stopwatch so that we don't exceed the 10 minutes. It's starting now. Do we have mics so that people can be enabled to speak? I'm sure there are roving mics. We do have roving mics. Is there anybody who wants to say something? And when I give you an opportunity to speak, please just introduce yourself when the mic gets to you so that we know whom we're speaking to. There's a lady at the back who is in red. Yes, we'll start with you and then the gentleman next to you and then the gentleman from the Free State. And then let's take 3 hands first.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. My name is Nikiwe Matebula. I am from the Pan South African Language Board. Mine is a comment and perhaps a question to Mr. Bruno Drachen regarding the officialization of South